Well, for more on the diplomatic battle between the UK and Ecuador and the latest in the Assange saga, Eva Gollinger, attorney and author, joins us now. Eva, welcome. So, what are the latest developments between or out of the Organization of American States, that meeting happening today?
Well, the meeting just concluded actually a little while ago, and after a day of deliberation, finally, there was a resolution that was agreed upon by most of the member states. It was no surprise whatsoever that Canada and the United States were the only ones that took issue with the resolution, with the final one. In fact, Canada said they couldn't support it. The U.S., in a very arrogant way, said that they would permit it or allow the resolution to go through, but would put in their own reserves and their footnotes to it, meaning that, of course, they didn't agree with it. But in any case, I mean, this was a solid showing of support for Ecuador. It was clearly a blow to the United Kingdom, to Sweden, to the United States as well. And also we have to remember that the United States and Canada had actually opposed the convening of this meeting in the first place. And so they maintained those positions throughout the meeting, whereas the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean were, of course, welcoming and found it important to talk about and debate this issue that's affecting one of the member states. I mean, that's the purpose in many cases of these types of multilateral bodies, is that, you know, they act in accordance with threats against one of their member states, or when some issue that's disturbing regional peace is taking place. And so that's really what went on today. And I think, again, it was a showing, of course, of the irrelevance of the Organization of American States today as an entity that includes the U.S. and Canada, when clearly they're at odds with the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Now, can you talk more about that resolution, the significance of it, and what exactly it proposed?
Well, it's not really a proposal of anything specifically to resolve the situation. I mean, it's really a statement of support for Ecuador. It's a rejection of the threats against Ecuador coming out of the British government. It's a reiteration of respect for international law, of respect for the concept of diplomatic asylum, of political asylum, respect for the integrity of diplomatic entities, embassies, consulates, et cetera. And again, it's a solid backing of Ecuador in this specific case of giving asylum to Julian Assange, and then the subsequent threats that they've received from the British government. There was an issue earlier in the day where the original statement that had been proposed, the original resolution, had to be modified because some of the other member states, including Jamaica, were at odds with the powerful language in it. And so that language was modified a little bit. But in the end, I mean, it came out to be the same thing. And it did show that distinct difference between the positions of the United States and Canada and the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is very symbolic of this image of an empire, be it an old empire or a newer empire, trying to impose its agenda on a country in the new world, and in this case, a Latin American nation, and Latin America standing together to show in unity that they absolutely will not let any other nation, be it as powerful as it may be, impose their agenda or their will upon the peoples of Latin America.
Okay, so does the resolution actually change anything? You know, we have the UK and Ecuador in this diplomatic battle right now. Does it do anything to change that situation?
Well, I mean, it's a solid showing of support, and that's important because it's yet another multilateral body. We've already had statements and meetings of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, of ALBA, which is another organization of Latin American states. All of them have also backed Ecuador. They've called for the British government to retract its threat against Ecuador. There was another brief given to the Ecuadorian government from England earlier today, in which they said that they weren't threatening Ecuador per se with their prior memo that had been sent. Nonetheless, they didn't retract that original threat or say that they wouldn't violate Ecuador's embassy to arrest Julian Assange. So I think what's important is this is another showing of the world eyes and the world opinion on England in this specific case, and that everyone is watching, and that there's a majority viewpoint that are opposed to the British government taking any kind of action to violate Ecuador's sovereignty. I think it's very powerful that there have been such rapid meetings convened of governments throughout this region, and to show such a solid support and backing for Ecuador in this stance against the British government. I mean, it may not change anything. They can't force the British government to do anything, obviously. This won't resolve the situation. But it certainly does show that, there is a majority opposed to the stance that England has taken. And so I think that type of support in public opinion and through foreign governments will aid in trying to find eventually a solution to this standoff between the two countries.
Looking now at Julian Assange's current situation, he remains stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Does it look like he'll find a way out of there anytime soon?
It doesn't. It looks as though he'll probably remain there for an indefinite time period. That's what has been reiterated by the Ecuadorian government. Unfortunately, the British government has also been pretty firm in its stance that it's not going to give safe pass. So without that, there's really no way to get him out. The Ecuadorian president was very clear that they're not going to try to smuggle Assange out some way and, to try to defy British authorities. So unfortunately, it looks as though he's going to be held up there at the Ecuadorian embassy in London for an indefinite period of time. And, we'll just have to see after a while. Someone's got to back down. So either someone's got to back down or he's just going to establish permanent residency in a very tiny space, which doesn't seem as though it would really be accommodating in the long term. But yeah, I mean, I think that the pressure is very important to continue to try to sort of whittle away this position, this stubbornness that England has taken in this specific case, and also to show, more and each time that these types of meetings take place and that the resolutions happen, and we see the U.S. position in particular, it's showing that the United States government is behind all of this and is behind the persecution of Assange. And so it's really important that that comes out and that people understand that, governments understand that, and that eventually, hopefully, the British government will back down. We'll have to wait and see.
And want to ask you, right now, we see Assange and Correa. They're very close allies. Assange had the president on his show here on RT. Let's say that relationship sours or he outdoes his stay at the embassy. What are the other options for Assange, or are there any other options?
Well, I'd have to say that I don't know if I would classify them as close allies necessarily in this case. I mean, this is a situation where an individual who is being persecuted for political actions and beliefs has requested asylum from the Ecuadorian government. Ecuador has been very clear, President Correa has been very clear that they will give asylum to those who deserve it. They studied this case very profoundly and came to their conclusion to give asylum. Nonetheless, I mean, there are always rules that you have to abide by under a political asylum or a diplomatic asylum. You're not supposed to make political statements that in any way could affect the relations between the country you've been given asylum in and other nations. Basically, you're supposed to limit that type of interaction with media and things like that. At the same time, I mean, there is a major issue here, which is that Ecuador has presidential elections next year. And Correa most likely will be a candidate. He hasn't announced his candidacy yet. He has a very high approval rating in Ecuador. So most likely he would be reelected, but all of those factors would have to be considered. Of course, another president could be elected in his place, and maybe they would take the asylum away. I mean, asylum is not a long-term binding issue that every government has to respect. It can be retracted. So we'd have to see what would happen in Ecuador. What options would Assange have? He would have to find asylum with another country, and he'd have to find a way to get into their territory. So.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. Eva, thanks so much for coming on the show. That was Eva Gollinger, author and attorney.
Thank you.
We'll still have